Imagine the ultimate weapon, the pinnacle of engineering, a steel monster with no equal on the battlefield. A tank whose armor is impervious to enemy shells, while its own cannon can incinerate any target from kilometers away, long before the enemy can even take aim. A machine whose very sight sends entire battalions into a panicked retreat. This was the Panzerkampfwagen NB, better known by its fearsome name, the King Tiger. It was the most powerful, most heavily armored, and deadliest tank to see combat in World War II. It was the apotheosis of German technological genius, the embodiment of Teutonic might, a weapon that seemed destined to turn the tide of the war and bring victory to the Third Reich. But history had other plans. This perfect predator, this flawless war machine, became not a savior, but another nail in the coffin of Hitler's Germany. How is that possible? How can a weapon be too good? This is the paradoxical story of how an obsession with technological perfection, a fixation on and a perfectionism taken to the point of absurdity can lead not to victory, but to a crushing defeat. It's the tale of a steel king who proved too heavy for his own crown. Before we dive into the main story, we'd like to ask for a little support. A like and a subscription would be the best form of thanks. Thank you. Now, prepare yourselves as we delve into the history of the most formidable and most useless tank of the Second World War. To understand why the Germans even decided to create this monster, we have to go back to the hell of 1941 and 1942 on the Eastern Front. The German Blitz, which had rolled so successfully across Europe, had bogged down in the vast Russian expanse, and the main reason for this was shock. The shock of encountering the Soviet T-34, German tankers, accustomed to their qualitative superiority, suddenly faced a machine that was better in every respect. Its sloped armor deflected their shells, while its gun easily penetrated their own tanks. This was the T-34. Following that, in 1942, came another nasty surprise, the KV-1 heavy tank. This lumbering, slow-moving behemoth was practically invulnerable to the German tank and anti-tank guns of the time. German soldiers had to let it get dangerously close and try to knock it out with the legendary 88mm anti-aircraft guns, the only thing that could stop it. The German High Command, and Hitler himself, realized they were losing their technological edge. An urgent and decisive response was needed. That response was the famous Panzerkampfwagen Tiger, which appeared on the battlefield in late 1942. It was a revolutionary machine, created specifically to combat Soviet tanks. Its thick, vertical armor and powerful 88mm gun restored the Germans' sense of superiority. The Tiger became a true tank killer, striking terror into Soviet and Allied forces. But even that wasn't enough. Hitler was obsessed with the idea of creating an absolute, invincible weapon. He demanded a tank from his designers that was even bigger, more powerful, and better protected. Thus began a race between Germany's two leading design firms, Henschel and Porsche. Both were tasked with creating a chassis for a new supertank that would surpass everything that existed at the time. Ferdinand Porsche, a brilliant but eccentric designer and creator of the famous Beetle, proposed a revolutionary but incredibly complex design with an electric transmission. His prototype was too unrefined, unreliable, and required vast quantities of scarce copper. In the end, the military chose the more traditional and reliable design from the Henschel company, but the turret for the new tank was sourced from another giant, the Krupp firm, and this turret was to carry a new, even more monstrous weapon. While the Tiger I was armed with a gun whose barrel was 56 calibers long, the new tank was to receive an upgraded version, the 88mm KWK-43, with a barrel length of 71 calibers. This was, without exaggeration, the best anti-tank gun of World War II. Its shell flare, flying at an immense muzzle velocity, could penetrate the frontal armor of any Allied tank. The T-34, the Sherman did shield from a distance of 2 or even 3 kilometers. For comparison, to penetrate the front of the new German tank, a T-34 had to get closer than 500 meters, and a Sherman had to be practically point-blank. This wasn't a duel, it was a slaughter. The new tank's fire was lethal long before the enemy could even hope to reply. But to carry such a weapon, it needed corresponding armor. And here, German engineers, having learned a bitter lesson from their encounter with the T-34, used its own main weapon against it: sloped armor. The new tank's entire armor scheme was set at steep rational angles. The 150mm thick frontal plate, sloped at 50 degrees, provided an effective thickness of over 230mm. No Allied tank gun could penetrate it from the front. Even on the sides, where the armor was thinner at 80mm, it was still sloped, significantly increasing its resistance. The new tank was conceived as a mobile fortress, an invulnerable tank destroyer. When the first prototype was ready in late 1943, it was staggering. It was a true land dreadnought. Its weight approached 70 tons. It was 20 tons heavier than its predecessor, the Tiger I. It was the apex of the German school of tank design, embodying both its strengths and its weaknesses. On one hand, it had unparalleled firepower and phenomenal protection. On the other, it had a monstrous weight, incredible complexity, and an exorbitant cost. It wasn't just a tank, it was a work of art, a precise and intricate mechanism assembled by hand, and therein lay its primary, fatal flaw. The Germany of 1944, exhausted by total war, ravaged by Allied bombing, and suffering from acute shortages of resources and skilled labor, simply could not afford to mass-produce such a marvel. But Hitler, obsessed with his belief in a Wunderwaffe, a miracle weapon that would turn the tide of the war, demanded its production at any cost. And so, the first King Tigers began to roll off the Henschel factory's assembly line, ready for their first battle. They were meant to be the Reich's last hope, the weapon that would stop the Soviet steamroller in the east and throw the Allies back into the sea in the west. But reality proved to be far more mundane and tragic. The King Tigers received their baptism by fire in the summer of 1944. On the Eastern Front, during the Elbe-Vendemias offensive, a few of these monsters were thrown into battle against advancing Soviet forces. The results of their deployment were both impressive and depressing. In firefights, they were unmatched. A single King Tiger could easily destroy an entire platoon of T-34s while remaining completely invulnerable to their return fire. The Soviet tankers were in shock. They had encountered an enemy they could not defeat in a fair fight. But as soon as the battle ended, the problems began. The tank's monstrous weight of nearly 70 tons placed colossal strain on its suspension and transmission. The 700-horsepower Maybach engine, which was perfectly adequate for the 57-ton Tiger I, was frankly underpowered for this behemoth. It operated at its absolute limit, constantly overheating and breaking down. The transmission, already a weak point in German heavy tanks, failed with depressing regularity. A tank that was invulnerable to enemy shells was utterly defenseless against its own complexity. Most of the first King Tigers on the Eastern Front were lost not in combat, but were simply abandoned by their own crews due to mechanical failures that were impossible to fix in the field. Soviet forces captured several perfectly intact but immobilized machines, which were immediately sent to proving grounds for study. A similar picture emerged on the Western Front. The first King Tigers entered combat in Normandy. The Allies had heard rumors of this new German tank, and its appearance caused a genuine tigerphobia. The crews of Shermans and Cromwells knew they didn't stand a chance in open combat. But here, too, the King Tiger proved to be a temperamental and unreliable giant. It was too heavy for the narrow French roads and old stone bridges, many of which simply collapsed under its weight. It struggled to maneuver in the Bocage country, becoming an easy target for Allied aircraft, which held undisputed air supremacy. And once again, the main cause of losses was not enemy tanks, but technical malfunctions. But the King Tiger's true, albeit tragic, moment in the spotlight came in the winter of 1944-45. During Germany's last major offensive in the West, the Battle of the Bulge, Hitler threw in his best, most elite SS Panzer divisions, equipped with the latest hardware, including a large number of King Tigers, in the snow-covered Ardennes forest. Under conditions of poor visibility that hampered Allied air operations, the King Tiger was finally able to show what it was capable of. It became the very spearhead of the German offensive. Its frontal armor could not be penetrated even by the best American anti-tank guns. It pushed forward, sweeping aside everything in its path. American soldiers were terrified. They watched as shells from their bazookas and tank guns simply bounced off these steel monsters. One King Tiger, under the command of SS Untersturmführer Karl Braumann, reportedly destroyed several dozen American tanks and armored vehicles in a single engagement. It seemed nothing could stop this steel avalanche. But here, too, the tank's greatest flaw emerged, the very flaw that ultimately doomed the entire offensive. That flaw was its monstrous appetite. The King Tiger consumed an enormous amount of fuel, over 500 liters per 100 kilometers on roads. Off-road consumption could climb to 1,000 liters. The entire German offensive was predicated on their ability to quickly capture massive Allied fuel depots. But they failed, and the steel monsters began to grind to a halt, one by one, not because of enemy fire, but simply because they ran out of gas. Dozens of these brand new, most powerful tanks were abandoned by their crews in the Ardennes forest. The crews would simply blow up their own machines to prevent them from falling into enemy hands and retreat on foot. The Ardennes offensive sputtered and died, and one of the main reasons for its failure was a tank that was too good, too heavy, and too thirsty for the war that a depleted Germany was fighting. In the final months of the war, the King Tigers fought on German soil, participating in defensive battles in Hungary, on the Seelow Heights, and finally, on the streets of Berlin itself. Here, in the ruins of cities, their shortcomings were less apparent. They operated from ambushes, using their powerful guns and impenetrable frontal armor to great effect. A single King Tiger well hidden in the rubble could hold up the advance of an entire tank column, but there were far too few of them. In total, fewer than 500 King Tigers were produced during the war. For comparison, over 80,000 T-34s and about 50,000 Shermans were built. It was a drop in the ocean. Each King Tiger was a masterpiece, but masterpieces don't win total wars. Its production consumed enormous resources that Germany no longer had. It required highly skilled workers who were being conscripted for the front lines. it was incredibly difficult to maintain. Any serious breakdown required it to be sent back to the factory. The story of the King Tiger is a story of a complete detachment from reality. At a time when Germany needed thousands of simple, reliable machines to plug the gaps in its front lines, its leadership, obsessed with the idea of a technological miracle, squandered its last resources on creating a weapon that was excessive and impractical. It was the agony of perfectionism. They had created the perfect dueling tank for a war that no longer exists, war where noble knights in steel armor met in honorable combat. But World War II was different. It was a war of logistics, resources, economics, and mass production. And in that war, the victor was not the one with the best sword, but the one who had 100 times more swords. The King Tiger was a beautiful but useless sword in the hands of a losing army. The culmination of the King Tiger's tragic story isn't a specific battle, but its very existence in the final months of the war. Picture it, the spring of 1945. Allied bombers are wiping German cities off the map. Soviet armies are rolling relentlessly toward Berlin from the east, while American and British forces advance from the west. The Reich's economy is in ruin. There are shortages of everything: fuel, ammunition, food, soldiers, and yet at the Henschel factory in Kosovo, the last remaining workers, under bombardment, are using their last ounces of strength to assemble these 70-ton monsters. Each King Tiger, in terms of cost and labor, was equivalent to 10 Messerschmitt Bf 109 fighters or 6 Panzer for medium tanks. Every liter of scarce gasoline it burned could have fueled several trucks carrying ammunition to the front. It was sheer madness. It was the death throw of a regime that clung to its faith in miracle weapons to the very end, ignoring the harsh reality. The tragedy of the King Tiger is that it was the perfect answer to a question no one was asking anymore. It was built to dominate the battlefield, but by the time it appeared, the battlefield itself no longer existed in the form its creators had envisioned. The war was now being decided by air superiority, artillery, and seamless logistics. And in all these areas, Germany was hopelessly losing. Every King Tiger that rolled off the assembly line was not a step toward victory, but a step toward defeat because it devoured resources that were vitally needed elsewhere. After the war ended, the fate of these steel giants was bleak. Most were left to rust on the battlefields or were cut up for scrap metal. Only a few examples survived and fell into the hands of the Allies, who studied them with great interest. They were amazed by the quality of the armor, the power of the gun, and the complexity of the design. But their conclusions were unanimous. This machine was an engineering masterpiece, but a military mistake. It was too complex, too expensive, and too unreliable. The Allies had chosen a different path. The path of creating balanced, mass-produced, and reliable main battle tanks, which were the descendants not of the Tiger, but rather of the Soviet T-34 and the American Sherman. The names of the designers who created the King Tiger were not forgotten, but their legacy proved to be a contradictory one. They created one of the most advanced fighting machines in history, but this machine did not help. In fact, it hindered their country. It became a harsh lesson for all subsequent generations of military engineers, a lesson that in a real war, victory goes not to the most complex and perfect weapon, but to the one that most effectively solves the tasks at hand under the existing conditions. So what is the legacy of the King Tiger today? Its military technical legacy is small. The concept of a super-heavy, highly specialized tank destroyer proved to be a dead end. No country in the world built anything like it after the war. Everyone bet on versatility and mass production. But its historical and cultural legacy is immense. The King Tiger has become one of the most recognizable and legendary symbols of World War II. For many, it represents the pinnacle of German engineering, albeit taken to an absurd extreme. It is a constant feature in video games, scale modeling, and military history literature. Its menacing, predatory silhouette still evokes a mixture of awe and admiration. Today, only about 10 King Tigers survive in the world. They are the crown jewels of the world's best tank museums in Bovington, Saumur, and Kabinga. And when you stand next to this 70-ton behemoth, you can physically feel its power and, at the same time, understand the utter futility of its creation. You see not just a tank, you see a monument to human hubris, a monument to an ideology that placed technological superiority above common sense and human life. It proves that you can create a weapon that wins every battle, yet still loses the war. Because war is not just the mathematics of armor penetration and shell velocity. It is also economics, logistics, and strategy. And in all those disciplines, the King Tiger received a failing grade. So what was it, a triumph or a tragedy? The answer is both. It was a triumph of engineering and a tragedy of strategic planning. It was the deadliest tank of its time, which, by being too good, too perfect for the real world, became its own worst enemy and helped bury the regime that created it. Your support, a like, and a subscription is very important to us. And don't forget to hit the notification bell to stay up to date and never miss our new videos.